How is a man with 10% of a brain able to function normally? What did 16th century Arctic explorers eat that made their skin fall off? Why did Columbus think the Earth had a nipple, like a breast? Learn the history behind these stories and well over 100 more in my new book, Facts That Aren't True. Check out my other book, too. Link in the description. You said, what is my justification for logic?
Yes.
So the way I think about it is I don't try to point to some ultimate grounding for logic because I think it's descriptive and not prescriptive. But I think that what logic does is that it recursively validates itself. So to me, the best analogy is language and grammar. You can't describe or affirm the laws, or not really laws, but the rules of grammar. You can't demonstrate grammatical validity in any other way than by utilizing language and grammar. There's no getting around that. And you can call that circular. I don't think that it's circular. I think it's recursive. So by recursive, I mean it doesn't prove itself, but it validates its own efficacy. So another example would be like science doesn't prove science, but science demonstrates the overwhelming efficacy of science. And you could say the same thing with mathematics. How do I want to say it? Like we prove things in mathematics, but mathematics just always recursively by its own rules is able to demonstrate how it works. I'm trying to say it in ways that don't sound so base, but that's the best I can do, I guess. Maybe I'm just a basic bitch.
No, I see where you're coming from, though. Like, that we use logic to understand, like, even what logic is and, like, the concepts of logic. I guess, like math and whatever would be the same thing. But my issue with that is, what's that? My issue with that is that logic exists. Right? I just want to say, like, do you believe that logic exists as a precondition, a transcendental precondition?
No, because that's some weird Neoplatonist stuff. It has never ever made any sense to me. Things don't like take law of identity or whatever. Things don't gain an identity as a conscious agent plucks from some ethereal, non-materialistic realm a thing called the law of identity and then grants it to it. That's just that's so silly. Like, for example, if you didn't exist, wouldn't it be true that this plastic bottle existed?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, what about if 10 people didn't exist? We can agree that it would still be true that this bottle would still exist. And then I think we can run that all the way to if no conscious agent in the universe existed, this bottle would exist. Now we come into the world and we interact with the world and we come up with schemes and heuristics and whatever to describe what we interact with, what we experience, and we label it these things. So I think that this is getting slightly tangential. I don't have a good segue into these, but I merely think that truth is a property that some sentences have, and logic is not necessarily a property that sentences have, but it's just a description of how grammar works, and it's descriptive, not prescriptive.
Okay, so would you just say that, like, truth just exists? It just is? In a sense?
Well, I think that truth is a concept that conscious agents use. So I think that it would be true that if I didn't exist, this bottle would exist, but not because truth continues existing eternally, forever, or even just temporarily when I'm not around or whatever. I think it's because a fucking bottle exists, and then we came up with ways to describe the way we interact with the world. So I would say that it's grounded in a material. Well, it doesn't have to be material, but it's grounded in a reality that really exists.
Okay, okay, but I'm gonna check you on that because in the reality, we can see the material things that exist in nature and all that in our world, but in a dysteleological universe, as in a universe that doesn't have any meaning or any purpose, how do you come to the conclusion that these things actually are true and that the other preconditions that we have or even knowledge itself is not some like mumbo jumbo nonsense, right? Because it's like the universe doesn't have any meaning. The universe is, I don't know if you believe the universe is eternal or not or whatever, but you probably say like, the universe created these things, but like how do you go from that, going from a universe that doesn't have any purpose to things that have purpose and meaning, and to truth, which is really like a epistemological question, I guess. You wouldn't really be able to say that anything is really true in that worldview.
What am I missing? Because I never heard what I'm missing that doesn't let me do that.
What you're missing is a justification for the transcendentals, like logic, truth, meaning, purpose.
Well, I think I did give it. I think the difference is you're claiming that logic and truth are things that exist independently of like the universe existing or whatever. Now, I don't really agree. Now, I think I actually have a pretty good retort to what you were saying, like how you got started, because you say, how do you derive any meaning or truth? What you started off saying to me kind of sounded a little bit like, how do you derive meaning or truth value in statements if the logic or whatever isn't eternal? Now, what I typically say to that is, I usually use an example of co-referential experiences. We, like different parties of conscious agents get together and we come up with conventions and rules and we agree, and sometimes we disagree, but the purpose of that is to come to some sort of conclusion or do the best we can to contribute to like our ideas of epistemology, and all of that. So my counter to that is, the counter I usually run to this accepts your position and then tries to reduce it to see if it holds true in the sense that it is supposed to. So let's pretend that literally nothing at all exists except for a consciousness, and we can call that God or whatever. Pretend nothing at all exists except this singular conscious entity that is supposedly the grounding for truth claims. Are you with me so far?
Yeah.
Okay. Now that single entity says, ding dong shlamma beep boop. Is that statement true, false, or meaningless?
Well, I would say that you're trying to say that basically it's like arbitrary, right?
Sort of.
Kind of like, yeah, like in the sense that like, if God was a different way, logic would also be a different way. But God does not personify logic. He conceptualizes it through divine conceptualism, right? And he would be the first mind to actually, derive logic, derive these things. It wouldn't be created. So in an alternate universe, he wouldn't be able to, switch it up and, make logic a bizarre world situation, because he conceptualizes logic, because logic needs a mind to conceptualize it. And if you believe God is, divine, he's a divine mind, he would be the first to conceptualize these transcendentals.
I think logic requires a mind to exist in a certain sense, but just want to go back to. So, are you saying that it would be true because the God mind makes it be true by virtue of it existing and proclaiming it to be true? Because my question was, is that statement true, false, or meaningless? And you didn't really answer it, but I think you're saying it would be true.
Well, yeah, it would be true, but it would be true in the sense that he doesn't like create it. Therefore, it cannot be arbitrary. That he conceptualizes it in his mind. He just doesn't like make it out of thin air, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but how is that not arbitrary? Nothing exists. There's nothing this statement can refer to. It has no value except that the only conscious entity in the universe thinks it. And now all of a sudden it's true. See, that can't make any sense to me.
Well, in the Christian belief worldview, if you believe that God is good and that, creates all things, whatever, even conceptualizes these things, you would have to derive the fact that through his conceptualism, I guess. Actually, no. See, but that's going to turn you to pull the arbitrary card on me.
Yeah.
What do you call it? I guess it exists. It always existed, but it existed before creation, I guess, in a sense. And he would conceptualize it in a sense that he would be the first mind to conceptualize it, and then after that he created creation, we would be able to conceptualize these things as well, these universals, right, that exist prior to human knowledge.
Sure. I mean, I can grant that statement is allowed to be true, but it's completely arbitrary. I think that it's really just actually meaningless because let's just take everything you said. A God, by virtue of the fact that it's an eternal mind or whatever, can, through whatever the hell the powers that God has or whatever, like God knows all truth propositions. So they already exist eternally. Then God creates an entire universe, and now humans are able to experience them. See, to me, that still makes a universe and epistemology no different than a universe without God, because the universe has to exist in order for us to be able to know any of these propositions. And let's go back to the example I used. So let's say God does create the entire universe. There are humans like you and I. Now let's sit here and think about this. Now, it's not the hypothetical that nothing exists except God's mind. It's now the hypothetical that the whole universe and everything exists. Now, what do you think about the statement "Shlammalama, ding dong, pip pop" or whatever the hell I said? Is that statement true, false, or meaningless?
In your worldview or mine?
I guess I'm sort of granting your worldview, so in yours.
I would say that would be false because, I would say that would be false because, I guess like God wouldn't, would not contradict himself. It would be, the law of non-contradiction, I guess. Like,
I don't see how that would be false. Let me use a better example that isn't, it's nonsense, but it's less nonsense. Do you know who Noam Chomsky was? Well, he's still alive, but but who Noam Chomsky is?
I know he's like something to do with like space or something, right?
No, he doesn't have anything to do with space. He's actually kind of a polymath of a lot of different things, but he came up with this concept of universal grammar that's the main reason he's famous. But then he's also like he has some pretty wild political ideas too. But anyways, he came up with this really interesting sentence to try to make a point. Colorless green ideas sleep furiously. It is grammatically it is correctly structured. Logically, there's nothing wrong with it, but it's utterly meaningless. Colorless green, that doesn't make any sense. Green ideas, that doesn't make any sense. ideas sleep. That doesn't make any sense. And sleep furiously. What the hell does it mean to sleep furiously? So in this universe, I'm trying to, well, I'll just show you what I'm trying to do here. You and I can agree that statement means absolutely nothing.
Yeah, nonsense.
But let's go back to my example before, where nothing exists except God's mind, and God's mind has the thought, colorless green ideas sleep furiously. We can't say that statement is false, but when the universe exists and you and I exist in it, we're sitting here saying that statement, it's not just false. Like, I think it's actually completely meaningless.
Yeah, but I feel like,
but
in a sense
if
that,
the only thing that exists is God's mind, then you can't say that it's false. And if by the nature of God, he can only say things that are true, this is a very weird kind of contradiction. And I've never talked to a philosopher or anybody about this exact example. But I think that this seems to kind of blow up because we have to say an idea that we regard as false would be true, which to me, I think we're violating logic, and we're doing it only because we have to commit that if God saith, then it beeth trueth.
yeah, but I would say like that would, but the like a false statement, God would not say a false statement. Therefore,
But nothing exists. So
nothing doesn't. But he can conceptualize it. Since he's all powerful, all knowing, all whatever, all benevolent. He can conceptualize these things.
yeah,
He can conceptualize
well,
these things, and it cannot go against his nature, since his nature is to be always true and always correct.
but
And I know that's kind of like, you probably would be like, say that's kind of like circular, but like it's circular in the sense that that's the kind of biblical interpretation of God, that he doesn't contradict himself, that he is true, that that he's not gonna say shlama nama ding dong, and then
But I think
and then,
you're kind of missing my point, and it's because I didn't articulate this. If nothing except God's mind exists, then there's no logical problem with a colorless green idea, because
Well, I would
there's
say
no
that's
such
just
thing as green yet, and so you can say, and the adjective colorless has nothing to do with anything, and there are no ideas. So you can say that there is such a thing as a colorless green idea because nothing yet exists, and you can merely proclaim it. But,
Yeah, but
in the real
wouldn't
world,
be able
that
to.
can't make any sense.
Yeah, but wouldn't he be able to conceptualize color and all these things, even though he hasn't created it yet? It doesn't really need to exist for him to have a logical understanding of it, or understand.
Yeah, but then it would just
logic.
be arbitrary.
Well,
See, because
how would that be arbitrary?
there's no such thing as these things, and God is just proclaiming now all of a sudden this sentence has the property of being true, even though this sentence doesn't reference anything that exists. Because this is that arbitrariness thing, and this goes into what the way we always describe things like true and knowledge and what is and is not logical, identity and whatever, is always grounded in what we actually experience. So I just think this blows up this idea of eternal truth, and that truth comes from a mind.
Here's my problem with this, right? This is my problem. I have I have the idea that these things don't need to exist yet. That God can have it in his mind, that he can perceive these things and still know that, that logic is logical, that these things are true, but he doesn't create them in the sense that these things exist and he can conceptualize them. I don't think that makes it arbitrary, because he would know that 2 + 2 = 4, and that 2 + 2 doesn't equal 5, because he would have to use that to create the universe, and that using
Wow.
logic.
We're just begging the
conceptualizing logic,
question here, though.
conceptualizing that, I don't know, that's my take.
Yeah, but we're just begging the question there, because you're just saying, well, but God would know how to do that, or
Yeah.
or God always does XYZ. And now we're just saying by definition that's how it works. But if by definition that's how it works, then according to God, the statement colorless green ideas sleep furiously has the ability to have the property of true, whereas that violates logic for us.
How?
And
How
now
though? How does he? How does he have?
because
to have
because
the-
colorless green is not possible. It's a contradiction of terms. And it's just literally nonsense. It's not even false. It's just complete nonsense. Although I don't know,
Yeah.
you could probably convince me
Okay. Well, yeah,
that's
like,
false.
yeah.
But then I can just invent my own deity that says any number of false things. And then in response to anybody else telling me otherwise, I'll just say, yeah, but I'm referencing that which is ontologically primary and the necessary grounding for blah, 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 which is actually something that apologists, not all, but many apologists do, because they betray their own senses all the time. We can see billions of light years. Well, the universe was still created 6,000 years ago. How? God spoke it into existence. They literally betray their own eyes in order to preserve the belief that they already have, and by that I mean the conclusion that they've already come to. So I could just do that too with all kinds of things, like colorless green ideas sleep furiously.
Okay, but I mean, okay, sure, like, but like, I don't know. I don't really. I think that I don't know. I don't see that as arbitrary. I don't really understand it. It's just like in the sense that that God can conceptualize logic and the other universals, and the fact that he doesn't create them, right? So in another world where it's flipped, right? You can't say that, oh, it's like backwards. I would say that he conceptualizes these things. He can know about the phrase colorless whatever green that sleeps furiously, but that means nothing to him. I guess in a sense that it doesn't really doesn't really mean anything, but he knows about it. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but he can know about something like that. I guess through knowledge and grammar and all these things. If he's all knowing, that would mean that he would have to know that as well. And I don't think that's arbitrary, because if it would be arbitrary if he created these universals and in another world, right, where God was evil, the universals, would be like, false is true, and some crazy like that. In the sense that I'm trying to make theorize.
Yeah, again, the problem is we are left in the position where we're saying that because we're saying God can, like, if God has the thought 2 + 2 = 5, is it true? Or are you saying that God cannot think 2 + 2 = 5?
I would say that would go against the law of non-contradiction, right?
I suppose so. God can't can't think or believe that 2 + 2 = 5.
I mean, he can think it, but he's not going to believe it's true, or like it's not going to. I guess it would just be meaningless, like mumbo jumbo, like the Noam Chomsky phrase, I guess. Like like he would understand. Okay. He would understand these things, but doesn't mean that.
But
it doesn't mean that you would have to make it true.
But so do you think that, well, if God claimed that 2 + 2 = 5, then it now would be true? Or do you think, no, that wouldn't be true?
Well, yeah, but that wouldn't happen because he would conceptualize logic and all these things. He wouldn't create it. And so in the fact that he cannot mess with the laws of logic, they just exist in the sense that he conceptualizes them. It doesn't create them. So in another world where you say that God, that 2 + 2 = 5, that wouldn't happen because he doesn't create these universals.
Wait, I'm confused. So you're saying in this world, God can't do that, but in another world, God could have made the claim that 2 + 2 = 5, and it would be true?
Well, I would say
it sounds like you're saying God relies on logic and that's why God can't know or say or think or believe 2 + 2 = 4. But now you're betraying that it comes from God. You're kind of saying that God is beholden to logic in a way.
I'm saying, he is beholden to logic because he doesn't create it; he conceptualizes it.
But
I guess.
I thought you said that I thought you believed that God does create logic and
No,
he's like the grounding for it and stuff like
he's
that.
the grounding for it, but he's not. He doesn't create it; he conceptualizes it. If that makes sense, he conceptualizes it in his mind. Doesn't mean that he creates it. Doesn't mean he can mess with it because it's immaterial, unchanging constant in the universe.
Sure, the problem I have with this is what you run into. I call them omni dilemmas. If God is, all these omnibenevolent, omniscient, all powerful, like whatever, then you run into problems like, well, can God believe or do something immoral? No. Well, then he's not. If he's all good, then he can't be all powerful because he can't do evil. Then some people just turn around and say, well, literally every single thing God does is good. So like if God just decided to kill all children, which he did once, then it's good. It doesn't count as murder.
Yeah,
Then it's like, okay, well, this is just a vicious circle. There's no definition of anything according to this type of worldview. I'm not accusing you of that.
Yeah,
Here,
but I don't think that would hold up like theologically, because it does say in the Bible that God uses calamities, uses things, and knows flood, blah blah blah. Like he judges people. That doesn't necessarily make them evil. You know what I'm saying? And
people say, like I listened to a debate yesterday and it was just really disgusting. But the guy said it was like a secularist versus a Christian. And the secularist was like, or the Christian was like, you don't have a grounding for anything being right or wrong. And then the secularist responds with, your God murders babies. And the guy says, first of all, it's not murder if God does it. Second of all, do you know how long those people had to repent? And it was like, fucking babies? Babies can do that?
Like, that's the thing with the text. Like a lot of it is, what is it called? Hyperbolic in some senses, like in certain poetry they use. Like I'm not saying, that could have actually happened. I don't know for sure. But, in a lot of like the Old Testament, you'll see like crazy hyperbolic, statements like we dashed the babies on the rock or da da da. You know what I'm saying? Like it doesn't mean that actually happened. It just means that, they're kind of like expressing like, their emotions through the documents or whatever was written. But yeah, like, okay. But the thing that I'm saying, like, with the conceptualization of logic and all these things, I feel like we have a grounding, or Christians have a grounding for God to establish these transcendental universals in a sense that that he would create man and that he would understand these things as well, and that, we would be able to, create things and all these things. And I feel like in a secular humanistic worldview, you don't have any evidence that these things even exist, let alone do you have a justification for it in a universe that really doesn't have any meaning, that is all just random chance. That I would say that would actually be arbitrary, and the fact that logic in a universe that doesn't have any meaning would ultimately become nonsense, ultimately become, useless, I guess. I would say that would become your problem if you're arguing from a atheistic worldview, because you have nothing to ground it upon. If the universe just is and it just exists, then it's just
that's my grounding.
Way. Yeah, that I'm saying that's arbitrary, and that, it's just way. That's just how it is.
Wait, how is that arbitrary?
Because the universe is random. It's a random chance. We randomly.
Well,
it's a random series of events that we came into being.
I very much disagree with that. But even if what happened, even if what we can come back to that, but even if what happens,
I kind of want to keep pressing this. I feel like this is a primary issue. If I'm being honest.
here I'll literally.
Because
There,
if you-
I literally wrote it down, but my point's not gonna take very long, I don't think. Even if I grant you that what occurs in the universe is randomness, that a universe exists, and therefore it would be the grounding for everything that occurs, and it would be the only possible way that intelligibility can exist.
Yeah, but it would be.
Then it wouldn't. Then that's not arbitrary.
That is arbitrary because the transcendentals are just random, meaningless gibberish. There's no meaning behind a dysteleological universe. A universe that has no meaning cannot ground transcendentals. A universe without meaning cannot ground objective truth. There's no objectivity. It's all just whatever the universe is.
No, it is objective. We agreed that if no conscious, if no
that doesn't have any meaning, the universe doesn't have any meaning.
Hold on, that's not what objective.
It just is.
No, but that's not what objective means. You and I agreed earlier that if not a single conscious creature in the universe existed, this bottle would still exist. That's objectively true because it stands independent.
That would only exist in my worldview and not yours, because in a universe without meaning, without transcendentals, without, if the universe without meaning, the universe created these transcendentals, right? From your perspective, they would create these universals.
We invented those as ways to describe our experience in the universe.
So knowledge, so logic didn't exist before knowledge?
Of course not.
So then
it's a grammatical syntactical convention that we have.
If logic didn't exist before knowledge, then I shouldn't take anything you say as logical, dude. There's no meaning behind the logic. There's no meaning in the universe before we existed to the logic. Then nothing is logical. This is just something we've invented.
You're just
to describe the world around it, like the world around us. But
you're conflating beliefs about things with the things themselves existing. Before you were born, there were things in this world that existed. Now you know about them. Now let's just keep running that. Before your parents existed, which is more people than just you, there were things in this world that existed that we describe in these logical terms. Like we claim that they're beholden to them, but really the logical terms are beholden to them. Run that all the way back. Nothing that can form beliefs or thoughts or make statements, which that's what doing logic is. None of those creatures exist, but a universe around us, well, we're not around, but a universe still exists. It's the grounding.
That's not a grounding. That's just saying it exists. You're saying the universe just exists.
Something has to just exist. There's no logical problem with claiming that a universe just exists.
Well, yes, there is, because the universe is dysteleological. It has no meaning. It has no purpose. Therefore, the universe creates these transcendentals that have no meaning, have no purpose.
We create them.
Therefore, our logic is meaningless and purposeless. Our logic,
it's literally not,
in your worldview, our logic is meaningless and purposeless because the universe created meaningless and purposeless transcendentals because the universe.
That's a composition fallacy.
How is that a composition fallacy? How's that a fallacy?
Just because there's no teleology to the universe doesn't mean that I can't hold beliefs about things in the universe or even about the universe.
Yeah, that's not a fallacy. Just yes, there is because in a dysteleological universe that just it's all random chance and it's all meaningless. There's no purpose. How do you derive purpose, logic, meaning, truth?
King, if the universe,
reality, if these things do not even, if logic does not even exist, if these transcendentals do not even exist prior to the said knowledge, that doesn't make any sense.
King, if the universe is dysteleological, then that statement is true. So it's logically true. So it's not true that you can't have logic in a dysteleological universe.
Yeah, but you can't say that because you.
Well, I just did. I'll do it again. Dare me.
But I'm
Double
saying,
dog dare me, I'll do it again. I will.
Yeah.
Chat, if you double dog dare me, I will say it again.
yeah, but I'm saying like
Nope, nobody
you
did.
can't say that because you would have to borrow my worldview to do
No,
that.
I don't.
Yes, you do because yes, you would because logic. You said logic doesn't exist prior to knowledge. Logic doesn't exist as a universal thing. Therefore, that you cannot even perceive logic without a mind. So that means that there's no logic before we existed. There's no knowledge. There's
There
no
are no
truth before
people.
we existed.
There are no
There's nothing.
there
It's
are
just
no
it's
minds.
it's
There are no
all
thinking minds. That's what I'm telling you doesn't exist. There is a universe that has all of the properties that we would
so
describe.
all it has but it has so you're saying that universals do exist before knowledge then.
Not in a mind. This is the weird conflation that
Then where does it
typically
exist?
happens
Where can you show me? Where can you show me? Where does logic exist? Where does logic exist? Do we have a logic detector?
in our
Can you show
minds.
me the
I would
logic
say it
detector?
doesn't really exist, but to the extent that it does, it exists in our minds.
Okay, so how do you provide evidence that logic exists as an atheist?
It's
But then,
recursive.
at the same time, you're gonna say if I say if God just exists, you know what I'm saying? You're gonna write that off as being irrational. Logic just exists. Logic just is. We just conceptualize it.
I don't think I ever said it was
Why is that?
I never said it was irrational. It's
Well,
not the slam dunk that
I'm
people
saying
think
like
it is.
I'm saying like hypothetically. I don't know if you would actually say that, but I'm just saying hypothetically, right? If logic doesn't exist prior to knowledge, then everything is there's no meaning before we even are formed or before we even have knowledge. So how would you even know that if logic doesn't even exist? Now you know what I'm saying? I feel like you have to borrow that you have to borrow my worldview to say that logic exists.
Yeah, I just strongly disagree. We ground it in something different, and
Well,
there's no contradiction in what I am telling you
I think
about
there are many. I think
what
there
I
are many.
believe that it can
I
be
think
grounded in.
I think you can't ground something that is not that ultimately is purposeless and has no meaning. It's ultimately random. That is
But you just
ultimately
concede it. But you, again, this is like the statement: there are no true statements. That is a paradoxical statement. A
well, yeah. In your
dysteleological
worldview,
universe has no truth to it, or something like that. Like,
it
however you're
doesn't.
going to say that, the statement itself renders the argument false.
Well, but I'm saying it from your worldview. I'm saying this teleological universe cannot provide logic
But that
because
statement is logically true.
yes,
So it
because from my
can.
worldview, I believe that God
You're not.
has a teleological
You
universe.
don't get to present the other worldview and then say that it's false according to your worldview.
Well, yes, I can because you don't even
No, you're
believe
not
these
doing an
universes
internal
exist prior to
critique though,
knowledge.
because the internal critique fell apart, and you said, "Yeah, but that's because my worldview." We're assuming not your worldview, and you
Okay.
jump back to your worldview to say that the fact that we found that there wasn't a pernicious contradiction in the opposing worldview uh, is no, I love comic relief. Is preserved by your worldview. It just doesn't work like that.
Okay, so you said I would have to find a reason why this theological universe cannot provide logic and all these things.
You'd have to find a contradiction or whatever. Because if you're
Gotcha.
going to do an internal critique, you can't, like, maybe I'm not going to be able to articulate this properly.
Yeah, I can't just switch from one worldview to another, I guess, right?
Yeah, if you're doing the internal critique, you can't say yours is false because mine is true. You'd have to find a
Okay, yeah.
contradiction in the opposing one. And when you say a dysteleological universe cannot ground logic, well, but that a disteleological universe existing would be a logically true statement. You could perhaps say that you wouldn't be able to know it in some sort of weird sense. You can claim that revelation from God makes you know that you can do all these things, but I think that that's pretty weak. Why am I helping you, chat? What is it doing?
This is good.
I'm talking
I
about me,
appreciate
chat.
it.
What is it doing? Shit, I had something else there, but well, whatever.
Okay, I see where you're coming from, though. I do. Okay, so I guess like yeah, the statement that right this teleological universe would be true in the sense that like um, you know that I'm making a truth claim in the sense that it's untrue, I guess, or false. I don't know.
I don't know either. I got distracted. Somebody said something funny.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what you said. Uh, like I don't know, the internal critique. I guess it would just be like for me. Okay, that a dysteleological universe. This is my argument that a dysteleological universe cannot ground these things. Cannot ground universals, even if it is true, because these universals wouldn't have any meaning. Therefore, we wouldn't even be able to articulate it.
I mean,
We
you
wouldn't
can
even have
articulate
knowledge.
them. Again, I think the best you can possibly do is in a dysteleological universe, the conscious agents have to decide what the truth is. So in a sense,
Yeah, but I'm saying they
the truth
can't do
claims are
that.
going to be arbitrary. So there's no such thing as the truth or
Yeah.
whatever.
Well, yeah, but
The
I'm
truth,
saying,
the whole
yeah,
truth,
I'm
and
saying,
nothing but the truth.
I'm saying they can't definitively say this is true. They can't definitively say, they can't even definitively have knowledge. They can't definitively come to logic
Well, I
because,
don't know what you mean by definitively. I think inductively we
oh yeah,
can do extraordinarily good work like science.
yeah. But I would say you would have to borrow my worldview to do that because in a universe that cannot ground universals that are meaningless universals, if the whole universe is meaningless, that would also by proxy mean that our articulation of these universals, logic, and creating all these things, it would just be it would be meaningless. It would be nothingness. It would be
I
total dissolution of anything in the sense that you wouldn't even be able to articulate these things and in the fact that we can articulate that we do have logic that we do understand things and have knowledge that proves the fact that there is a higher power that created these transcendentals to have or not created the transcendental but conceptualize these transcendentals that so that we may conceptualize them and understand them and create things to be true because it would derive from backwards all the way back to him, I guess.
I mean, you can say that, but I don't think that there's any logical problem with me just making the presupposition that reality operates according to immutable natural law. And so when
Yeah, but a
we
beautiful
when
natural
when we
law that
describe things about the universe, we're learning true things about it. And so it's that's where the grounding rests.
well, I wouldn't really say that's grounding because if you were living in a dysteleological universe, hypothetically, right, and you came to these things that are understanding, and we understood all these things that you thought were grounded upon and thought were justified, they would actually not be justified because the universe would ultimately have no meaning. Therefore, the transcendentals would have no meaning. Therefore, our understanding and articulation of logic and all these other transcendentals would also be meaningless. Therefore, it would be a contradiction.
My mind wandered off a little bit at the very end. I think we might be going in circles though at this point.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. But do you see where I'm coming from? Kind of like in the sense that if the universe is meaningless, right? And the universe, I don't know if you think these things exist or they created these transcendental preconditions that if these that it created these transcendental preconditions that they would be meaningless, and then by proxy, us having knowledge of these preconditions would also be meaningless because the creator of these preconditions is ultimately meaningless. It's ultimately nothingness. It's ultimately doesn't have any purpose. So then our logic wouldn't have any purpose. We wouldn't be able to articulate these things, and that's my argument for God, I guess.
Yeah, so I don't think you would need to have a teleology to know true propositions about things, because if a dysteleological universe existed, that would be true, and we could go from there. There would presumably be other true things we could know. I think the only thing you really have here is this case that, but you couldn't know it for certain, and what presuppositionalists do in what I think is just the most ridiculous cop-out thing of all time. They say, oh no, I can absolutely know things because it's revealed to me. And it's like, okay, well, I hear voices in my head too, therefore I know with certainty X, Y, Z.
I wouldn't even say that. I would just say that.
Well, that's what they tend to say.
Yeah, but I would just say that it would be grounded in God, not upon me. It would be grounded upon Him, right? And in the sense that,
but how do you know that? The only thing they can do is say that it's revealed to me. Typically, they piss and shit all over themselves and run away and won't address that because I think they know that they have such a weak case here. Because it's like, okay, you claim that it's this ultimate thing and that it's God. How do you know that? A lot of them will just say, same way you do. I was like, could you actually answer the question though? And then they say everybody knows God exists and it's revealed. And there's no demonstration of knowledge there.
But I wouldn't even say that it would be revealed. I would say that you would come to this understanding through the transcendental argument, that you would come to this understanding through the fact that since things do have meaning, since things do have purpose, since logic exists as a universal, at least in my worldview, you would be able to bring that back to God without even really having a revelation. Revelations, help, but we could see through the construction of the universe that and the fact that these universes exist prior to knowledge, prior to any evidence that we have, that what I'm saying, the universe acts in a logical manner, mathematical manner, then that would be our evidence to see that God exists and that the created order of things is logical and makes sense. Not that something is revealed to me and I just believe it because it's revealed to me. I believe it because I can use my knowledge to rationally assess the fact that if you didn't have God, then we would be living in a teleological world with teleological universals, and that nothing would make sense. Nothing would be meaning that would have meaning. Nothing would have purpose. Nothing would have any sense of coherency in that. Yeah.
I just realized we never went back to that thing I said we would go back to, which is that the universe is not random. I literally wrote it down and I said we would come back to this, and then we never did.
Yeah.
But I mean, we've been going for 50 minutes now. Yeah. So I don't know how long you want to spend on it, but I mean, the reason things happen is because of, like, I can just say it the most simple way, is because of the laws of physics, which are non-random.
Okay. Yeah, so, they're not random, but they may not be random, but then I guess my check to that would point to design and creation in the universe. But you believe in a universe that doesn't have you know, that is ultimately purposeless and meaningless. So how can you say that it isn't random? You would have to borrow my worldview for that.
But that's not the symmetry breaker for randomness. Random just means like a truly random event just has no antecedent cause to it, or it's completely unpredictable. It's future. What would be the what the hell's the term here? Its future condition or state is independent of any current state. So you couldn't possibly predict what it's going to be
So
based
like
on any
so
information you currently have.
so the universe is completely predictable. You know everything that's going to happen in the universe.
In principle, I think it probably could be known. There have been some experiments through like Bell's inequality theorems that demonstrate that there are really things that fundamentally cannot be known ahead of time, and that's interesting. But those are still describable through equations in physics, so I wouldn't call it true or real randomness in any sense.
Yeah, okay. I wouldn't say randomness, but I would say ultimately it would be purposeless. In the fact, I mean, actually, I don't know. I guess I would actually say it's random because since if there's no meaning, there's no purpose behind it. If things are designed, the way that they should be, um, then we wouldn't. Then we don't live in a teleological universe. Then we don't live in a universe that is ultimately meaningless because it would point to design, point to creation, point to a divine creator, designer. I guess that would be my contention with that. The fact that we know that we can use certain equations to find out things about the universe point back to everything being in order. In a dysteleological universe, I don't think things can be in order. Or at least they don't have any purpose to the order. There's no purpose to it, so you wouldn't really be able to conceptualize it.
Well, I mean, we've done that already 10 times, so.
Yeah, I know.